So the year was 2004. The same revolutionary who led the Scots against the English in Braveheart and the American colonists also against the English, there's a theme there, and the Patriot, made a movie called The Passion of the Christ. Anybody see that? Oh, you all saw that. Okay, I did not. I wasn't allowed to when it came out because I was 11 and it was rated R. By far, and still to this day, by far one of the most graphic, bloody depictions of Jesus' death. And I believe that was certainly the point. It was intentionally designed to spur on emotion and anger and sadness, to make people, to confront them with what their sin did to Jesus. But when we read this scene, this isn't exactly what the gospel writers choose to focus on. I mean, certainly it was sobering what was done to Jesus, but the focus was not on blood and guts, but it was on his enthronement, to show how God became king. And at the center of allegiance or apprenticeship to Jesus is a cross, a Roman torture device. What's now become a church logo or a piece of jewelry was by far for the Roman Empire, one of the most shameful and painful things you could do to a person. You would hang there naked and slowly die from asphyxiation. And they would line the road to any city with crosses to reveal their oppression and their dominance. It was so shameful that a Roman citizen, no matter how bad the crime was, they would not be crucified. Where Mel gives all the gory details, all the gospel writers could say, they crucified him. And so as we work through this text of Jesus' death, I am struck by what he says in Mark 8, just a few chapters before this scene, as a foretaste of what apprenticeship to him is. And it's this: whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. That's his invitation. And his question is, do you want that? Verse 1. Very early in the morning, the chief priests with the elders and teachers of the law and the whole Sanhedrin made their plans, and they bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. If you remember Pilate, so a few months ago we talked about when Jesus came into the city. As he's coming into the city, Pilate also was coming into the city. Pilate didn't live in Jerusalem. He was a Roman bulldog governor. He was a knight. So those guys got the worst jobs. They had to go to a city where there could be uprising, and they had to go and try and put a stop to it. So Pilate is in a place he doesn't want to be. He lived in Caesarea Maritima, which is a beautiful spot. It's about 60 miles north of the city. But the week of Passover, if you remember, this is when Jesus was making a ruckus. This is when hundreds of thousands of people that didn't live in the city came into the city, and they all hated Rome. So he's there to try and stop this. And Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Verse 2. "You've said so," Jesus replied. And the chief priests accused him of many things. And again, Pilate asked him, "Are you not going to answer? See how many things they're accusing you of." But still, he made no reply. So I'm really struck by the amount of parallels between this scene with Pilate and with the Sanhedrin. If you remember last week, Will preached on a lot of things, but he preached specifically on the Garden of Gethsemane and then Jesus' trial with the Sanhedrin. But what's really interesting to me is all of the parallels between these two scenes. They both ask him, "Are you going to give us an answer? What about these things that has been charged against you?" In both scenes, Jesus is totally silent. In the scene with the high priest, he questions, "You're the Messiah, right? The Son of the Blessed One." Pilate asks him, "You're the King of the Jews." And Jesus just turns it around on them and says, "What do you say? Who do you say that I am?" Both scenes end with a verdict, a mocking, and then a torturing scenario. And hopefully by this point, as we have been going through Mark, you have seen that whenever there are these blatant parallels, there's a point he's trying to make. And the point is this: Jesus is rejected and treated similarly by both Jews and Gentiles. Which makes sense. Jesus prophesied about this when he said, "You will see the Son of Man," Mark 14, "sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One, coming on the clouds of heaven." If you know this scene, this is straight out of Daniel 7. And Daniel 7 is this prophetic, apocalyptic scene where the Messiah has come and he's ruling over the human kingdoms of the world that are oppressing the world. And it's symbolized by these like beasts. There's these 4 beasts that all represent oppressive empires back then and also today. It wasn't just a back then thing. This is very much a real thing happening too. And these beasts are trampling this figure called the Son of Man. But later in that scene, the Son of Man, he rises and he goes to be with the Ancient of Days, and he's seated at the right hand of the Mighty One. And Jesus has in his mind what's happening to him right now is that he's being trampled by oppressive empires. Another prophecy, Psalm 22. If you read Psalm 22, it is blatant connection after connection after connection to the cross. And he says in verse 14, he says, "Many bulls surround me. Strong bulls of Bashan encircle me." These roaring lions. They tear their prey and open their mouths wide against me. The bulls of Bashan in the scriptures, they represent, and we've been tracking with these characters, these rebel gods, these rebel spiritual beings that are behind the nations. They're the ones that are causing the ruckus on earth, the nations that are at war with Yahweh. So listen, here's why this is important. In Jesus' mind, both Rome and Israel have become oppressive empires. God's chosen people have become just like their oppressors, and they are trampling the Son of Man. The beasts are circling. The bulls that are the rebel gods are circling, and they're a raging war. Does it make sense? Okay, verse 6. Now it was custom, Will just read this, at the festival to release a prisoner whom the people requested. This was not a Jewish thing. This was a Roman thing, again, to try and appease the crowd. So if somebody committed murder or was on trial, they would release one person in order for the people to not just like totally go chaotic. And so what's happening here is there's a man named Barabbas, and he was in prison because he had committed murder. Okay, they don't like the Romans, so for some, they go to the extreme of just flat out murdering them. And the crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for him what he usually did, as in release a prisoner. And so he says to them, "Do you want me to release the King of the Jews, Jesus?" Again, knowing it was out of self-interest, but the chief priests, they stirred up the crowd and they said, "No, give us Barabbas instead." "What shall I do with the one you call King of the Jews?" "Crucify him." Why? What crime has he done? But they kept on screaming louder and louder, "Crucify him." And so wanting to satisfy the crowd, he released the murderer to them, Barabbas. And he had Jesus flogged, and he handed him over to be crucified. 2 men on display, Jesus of Nazareth, the innocent, and Barabbas, whose name means, I kid you not, Son of the Father. And by the way, in the original Greek, his full name is Jesus Barabbas. Jesus, do you see what's going on here? Jesus, Son of the Father, Jesus, Son of God, 2 men on display. Do you see the irony being painted here? Jesus' name means Yeshua, which means God saves. So we've got 2 sons of the Father, but alternate visions. And Mark is demonstrating 2 very different Israels here. Do you want the Jesus who represents oppression and violence and taking the kingdom the way that we want it? The man who started a riot against Rome and killed people in the name of, again, trying to liberate Israel and make Israel great again? Empire, nationalism, you want that vision? Or do you want Jesus of Nazareth, who's come to represent a whole new way of being, a whole new way of being human? Two very different visions also of how Israel is supposed to treat the nations. Because in Barabbas' vision, he wants to kill the pagan oppressors, but Jesus of Nazareth says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. So here's the twist, though. Jesus of Nazareth puts himself in the place of rebellious Israel by trading places with Barabbas. If Barabbas represents all of Israel who's rejected Jesus of Nazareth, then Jesus of Nazareth takes their place, and the guilty Jesus is let free, while the guilty Jesus, is let free, and the innocent Jesus is going to be killed. It's the story of Eden all over again. Take matters into your own hands, define for ourselves what's good in our own eyes, abandon God's way, and he gives them over to it, which leads to death. Can you see it? This is the tale as old as time. Verse 16, the soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, and he called together the whole company of soldiers, and they put a purple robe on him, and they twisted together a crown of thorns. They began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And again they struck him on the head with a staff, and they spit on him. And falling on their knees, it says they worshiped him, but as a mocking way. They took off the robe, put on his clothes, and they led him out to crucify him. And it says there was a man from Cyrene, Simon, who was just there in the city, by the way, and they made him carry the cross. And they brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull, and they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he wouldn't take it. And they crucified him. And they divided his clothes, and they cast lots to see what each would get. And it was 9 a.m. when they crucified him, and the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." So scholars call what's happening here in this scene, it's called a Roman mock triumph. Rome would crucify anyone who claimed kingship without Roman approval, led a rebellion, stirred up nationalistic expectations, or threatened Roman order, none of which Jesus did. But they also would kill people claiming royal titles, i.e., quote, Son of God, or Anointed One. That was treated as a political threat. And while Jesus himself doesn't claim these titles, others claim them of him. And so crucifying Jesus with this charge, King of the Jews, was completely in line with Roman policy, because a mock triumph was performed for a defeated rebel king. It was meant to humiliate them. Here's some elements of a mock triumph. See if any of these are similar to what they do to Jesus. They put a cloak on the condemned, imitating royal or military regalia. They put a crown on his head. They put a scepter in his hand. They do a public parade before soldiers. They do mock worship, as in soldiers bow to this rebel king. They beat and torture. They take them to the place of execution, and then they kill them in public for a lesson. Any of that sound familiar? It's exactly what happens to Jesus. For Jesus, they put a purple cloak on him, and they twisted a crown of thorns. They put a reed in his hand as a fake scepter. They kneeled down and hailed him, King of the Jews, and they spit on him and beat him, and they paraded him through Jerusalem, and they executed him outside the city, and then they put his charge, the King of the Jews. Every single element matches what Rome would do to rebel kings. But listen, make no mistake, the gospel writers know exactly what's happening, because Jesus is being enthroned in their eyes through humiliation. But Daniel 7 says, no, this is his actual enthronement. He turns Rome's parody into his enthronement. The cross becomes his throne. The beast, or killing the Son of Man, but all of that leads to his rising and glorious victory over all creation, because the King of the Jews was written in both Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. That was what the entire known world spoke. Meaning the entire world could read that Jesus is king. The cross is his enthronement over all creation. Verse 27. It says they crucified 2 rebels with him, one on the right and one on the left. And those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads, saying, well, you are going to destroy the temple and build it up in 3 days. Come down and save yourself. And in the same way, the chief priests and teachers of the law mocked him. He saved others, they said, but he can't save himself. Let this Messiah, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross so that we can see and believe. And those who were crucified with him also heaped insults. So this language, one on the right and one on the left, that sounds familiar because we've read that story before. It's in Mark 9, when James and John come to him and say, Teacher, we want you to do whatever you ask for us. And they say, put us on the right and left when you come into your glory. Jesus is like, you have no idea what you're asking. Can you drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with? Yeah, sure. Well, you will drink the cup and be baptized, but the one on my right and the one on my left, that's not for me to grant. Those belong to those who have already been prepared. And I just there's no way of knowing this, but just gauging general timing, I wonder that when Jesus was saying that, the 2 men that were about to be crucified with him were being arrested for murder. Jesus sees that moment that he is crucified as him coming into his kingdom with one on the right and one on the left. This is his upside down enthronement. And the priests that say that we may see and believe, this is a mocking that's reminiscent of Jesus saying, well, you asked for signs, but you don't believe. Nothing I can do is going to make you believe. You are too far gone. You have hardened your heart beyond saving. In verse 33, at noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. Do we remember at the very beginning of the scriptures that when God creates, what does he say? He says, let there be light. And it says darkness separates from the light, but we've got the reverse happening here, because when the Son of Man dies, order is plunged into chaos and darkness descends. In verse 34, at 3 p.m, he cries out, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? This is straight out of Psalm 22:1. The picture here is that the Father has literally turned his back on Jesus because Jesus has become the faithless Son. Israel was considered the Son of God, the covenant partner. They blew it. And so Jesus, who came as the faithful Israelite, has now traded places, and now he is the faithless one. And God has turned his back on him. And when some of those standing near heard this, they said, listen, he's calling Elijah. And someone filled a sponge with wine vinegar, which I always thought this was like a mean thing they did to Jesus, but this is like their version of Gatorade. So this is actually a kind gesture. And they put it on a staff and they offered it to him to drink. Now leave him alone, they said. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down. And with a loud cry, he breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn from the top down. And when the centurion, a Gentile Roman centurion who stood there in front of Jesus and saw how he died, he said, surely this man was the Son of God. So I want you to notice just a few more parallels from this passage that Mark gives us in other stories with his baptism and his transfiguration. In the baptism, it says the heavens are torn and the dove descends. In the transfiguration, his garments turn white and a cloud descends. But in the crucifixion, the sanctuary veil is torn. and darkness descends. In the baptism, a voice from heaven, you are my beloved Son. In the transfiguration, this is my beloved Son. But in the crucifixion, there's no voice, but Jesus's. And the voice that gives his identity is a Roman Gentile. And in all three scenes, we've got this Elijah figure. And why is that important? Well, some thought Elijah was going to be the forerunner when the great and terrible day of Yahweh came, and that when judgment would fall on God's people, which it is. Again, Jesus is seen as the faithless Israel. But it was also believed that Elijah would come in time of need of the righteous. So anyone who called on Elijah, he would come and rescue them. So that's what they think he's doing. And again, I already talked about the Gatorade, but Jesus refuses it. Because remember, earlier on it says, those who drink from this well I provide will never thirst again, but he chooses to thirst for us purposely. And then he dies. And immediately, it says that the curtain in the temple tore from the top down. And I've got this really chaotic and crazy picture, so just track with me here. But it was thought in the Jewish imagination that the temple was the hotspot of heaven and earth. And this veil was this separating point between God's space and man's space. And this veil, or this barrier, was known as the rakia. Can you say that? All right, you are with me. So the rakia was this thin kind of boundary that was between God's space and man's space. And the temple veil was described as being made with blue, purple, scarlet, fine linen. It had cherubim, like these angelic figures kind of worked into it. It also had celestial imagery like sun, moon, and stars. Do you see what's going on here? This thing literally rips in two supernaturally from the top down. And what that means then is God's space is invading man's space. Heaven is invading earth. And I love this, verse 40. Some women were watching from a distance. Among them, Mary Magdalene and Mary, mother of Jesus, and Salome. In Galilee, these women had followed him and cared for his needs, and many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there. It's no surprising that Mark specifically puts these unlikely characters in the story. Like, remember when we just read about the Roman Gentile? He's painted positively as one of the first preachers, a Roman Gentile. But he does it here with women too. Don't listen to a preacher who says that all of Jesus' disciples abandoned him, because they're right there. The women are courageous, present. In the upside down kingdom, Gentiles and women were excluded from the inner courts and the presence of God, but not here. They are the closest ones to the presence of God and Jesus. Do you see that? In verse 42, we're almost done. It was preparation day, the day before Sabbath, because they had to kill him before Sabbath, because again, you don't work on the Sabbath, right? So they killed him. Thank you, Will. They killed him on Passover. The Lamb of God, they killed on Passover, all right? I mean, again, it's too good. And they buried him before Sabbath because, again, just very obscure things that Jesus is fulfilling left and right. But Deuteronomy 21 says you shouldn't leave a corpse on a tree overnight, lest they be under God's curse. So there's just all these things that Jesus is doing. And it says as evening approaches, Joseph of Arimathea, who is a prominent member of the Sanhedrin, by the way, he goes to Pilate and he asks for his body. And Pilate's surprised that he was already dead. And summoning the same centurion, he asked him if Jesus had died. And when he learned that Jesus did, he gave the body to Joseph, and at great cost to himself, okay? Joseph buys some linen cloth that wasn't cheap, took down the body, wrapped it in linen, and put it probably in his family plot, the tomb that was cut out of rock, and he rolled a stone against it. And Mary Magdalene and Mary, mother of Jesus, saw where he was laid. And that's how it ends. Hopelessness, darkness, waiting. And I mean, yeah, we know the end, but they didn't. They're just left in darkness and waiting. Can you imagine how you would feel? Maybe some of you have felt a version of that before. What St. John of the Cross called the dark night of the soul, where you just don't feel God's presence anymore like you used to. Maybe you've said your own version of Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. Where are you, God? I find it really fascinating that we're exploring Jesus' death in a time when people celebrate his birth. That dissonance feels a little bit like reality, though, right? Because it's, quote, the most wonderful time of the year. But for so many of us, it might be one of the most painful times of the year. Where the night is bright with Christmas lights, but also on earth, it is the darkest and least amount of sunlight on earth. Advent is all about this tension, waiting, hoping, and hopelessness. Your kingdom has come, but there's still so much suffering. The light has dawned, but darkness feels as thick and heavy as ever. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, where are you, Lord? So today, I'm not going to give you any application. Know why this matters for you today. No, today is simply about sitting in tension, in grief, and allowing yourself a chance to simply lament, which is the practice for this week. I mean, we do practice the way still, so we will practice lament prayer, but today is not about bypassing. Today is not about, yeah, he died, but don't worry, Sunday's coming. True confessions, we're not actually going to finish Mark until Easter. We're not going to get to the resurrection until 3 months from now. We are ending this week and next with his death and allowing ourselves a chance to feel the weight of that, to feel the grief, to feel the betrayal, to feel the hurt. Again, they left everything for that man and he is gone. And in some ways, they probably felt like he abandoned them. What do we do now? So let's put ourselves where they were, in darkness and stillness that I imagine was so heavy. And before we move on and do anything else, I invite you now simply to be still and let's experience that heaviness together.